So some of you who were here 2 years ago, I guess, it occurs to me you might recognize the outfit. I have very few Zoom outfits, but maybe not. But it's so good to be with you here again. These are scary times, I think, and they're also brave times. And I like to think that there are brave people among us here, and that we're trying our very best to preserve what's best within us. And that means the desire to work together, to collaborate, and to work towards peace and kindness and equality and health. I think we're all in for a treat tonight. The women that you'll be hearing from are smart and brave and kind and funny when appropriate, and pushy when appropriate. And one of those appropriately pushy times came from a person you saw before and is somewhere on your screen now, and that's Christine Dougherty. Because without Christine, she pushed and she pulled and she pushed some more until she got me to push and pull on Lori. And we ended up with the beginning stages of this incredible endeavor of the West Virginia Feminist Activist Archive. We are honoring women's work, and I believe women's lives through story. And that's what we'll be experiencing a lot tonight. So some of you were here 2 years ago at the Don't Throw It Out. I watched that again last night, and I laughed a lot, and I cried a lot as well. It was wise and it was funny, and because the dangers that it also referred to weren't funny, they were serious. But we don't give up, and we don't give up as women. And we know what we can do when we work together, and we know what we can do when we preserve our stories to pass down to our children. And that is very much what this is about. I'll be your guide tonight. I think you're all in really for a treat. Guiding you from one storyteller to the next. I'll try to be as graceful as possible on our journey. There are two things that are going on kind of simultaneously tonight. One of them is, this is the story of the preservation of women's work that without the women you will meet would not have necessarily been preserved, and would have been an impossible thing to do without this project. These are women who insisted on and assisted with the preservation of our history. There's a second goal, and that's to celebrate and to inspire all of you here today. Most of you maybe already are doing this, but there's some maybe who still aren't, to pay attention and to value your own lives, your own stories, your courage, your fears, your truths. One of the people who's here, and you will hear from a little while, Betty suggested that we might have changed the title from this Zoom from Lost and Found to Hidden, Found, and Shared. I think she's absolutely right. Hidden and now shared. I really like that. So I'm going to make the transitions between the people that I introduce to you, and I'm going to introduce everyone with a little bit about them. Many of you know each other even better than I know you, but I want to make sure that we're all familiar with each other, and then I hope we can go seamlessly from one story to the next. So first, Lori is going to be, she'll be the first person speaking to us. And Lori Hostuttler was literally one of those without whoms Do you know what I mean by without whom's? It's usually at the beginning of books, this is a person without whom, this is another person without whom. All these people are without whom's. Literally, without these without whom's, we would be without much more than these whom's. And I'm really so grateful for that. Lori was in a position at the West Virginia University Libraries at the time that Chris Dougherty was insisting, and thank you, Chris, that I do something to preserve the story of women's activism in West Virginia. She knew that I was with the Center for Women and Gender Studies at the university. She thought I probably had more power than I did, but she knew that if she pushed hard enough, and if I found the right person, who was Lori at that point, that we would be able to work together. And it was Lori and I who made, and then others joined, but who made the first trips down to Charleston, West Virginia, and began collecting slowly, but deliberately, the papers with the help of people you will meet, like Betty Justice and others, to start to build this archive. So you'll be hearing first, excuse me, from Lori. Next, we will be hearing from Betty Justice. And Betty, I've known since the early 80s. She was an instructor at the Institute for Labor Studies at West Virginia University when she began volunteering with Artemis. And Betty worked with Carrie, who you will also be meeting, those of you who don't know her.
Judith, let me interrupt. Yes. My understanding is that Carrie goes before me.
Well, not on one of the lists that I have, but you can rearrange yourselves as much as I thought, whatever you two want to do, okay? Is that, what do you think? Is that all right? So let me continue to introduce you, Betty, if that's okay. And then if you want Carrie to go first, she will? Okay, thanks. I may have an old list that Michelle prepared for me, but I apologize if I got that wrong. But still a little bit about Betty, because you were certainly one of the very first people to work with Artemis and on some of the very important things that you did. I don't know which one of you is going to be talking about the work with Lorraine Mollman and the Defense Committee, but we will learn from you at that time. Carrie, I think I met Carrie, maybe was already working at Artemis, but Carrie was one of my students many years ago in the early 80s. Women, I think we were calling the course at that point, maybe women writers or images of women and writers. It was the very early years of women's studies at WVU. And Carrie was the person who worked, she made it sure that we were able to pull off the Women and Health Conference, a conference that was the occasion of the creation of Artemis with the production of the concert with Holly Near. After retiring, she lived in not West Virginia, in California for a number of years. I know she doesn't consider it her greatest achievement, but I was always tickled by the fact that one of the things she did, as well as produced an enormous number of women's music concerts, is that she was in charge of the shoe conference in Las Vegas, which for some reason, Carrie, I thought was just a remarkable thing, particularly for a feminist to be involved in, but manage, lots and lots of people who probably couldn't care less about the things she really cared about, but pulled off one magnificent conference after another. She now lives in Nashville and continues her work. The next person I have will be Eileen Klein, person who I have actually only met again recently, but also moved to West Virginia. Some people you'll be meeting were born here. Most of us moved here and they couldn't get rid of us. I don't think that's true of Betty. Betty, I think you maybe were here. from the beginning, but the rest of us, I don't like to think of us as invaders, but as settlers who maybe earned their keep. Eileen was a staff attorney at the North Central Virginia Legal Aid Society and instrumental in many of the programs at Artemis and in many of the important projects that Artemis got involved with, like Women Against Pornography and other defense committees. And Michelle, hi Michelle, who I met through Carrie, was employed also with the West Virginia Legal Aid Society and worked on many of the Artemis efforts, including one she, I think, had forgotten about or didn't think that was preserved, a radio program about the women. And now she also is in Tennessee. And Celia, Celia Poe, our latest and youngest member of the team, is a PhD student in the history department at WVU. And without Celia, we would not have what is going to be the way of permanently saving these treasured stories. She is our videographer and does our oral histories. And what I'm also looking forward to, Celia, although it does not have immediately to do with Artemis, her PhD thesis is on absinthe. And she's explained to me how this is related to gender. I'm not remembering at the moment, but it just fascinates me. So Celia, so happy to have you as part of this team. So we will have Lori, and then I think now Carrie, Betty, Eileen, and Celia talking with us about their work in the saving of women's lives and histories. So Lori, it's yours.
Thank you so much, Judith, for that lovely introduction to the program and really meaningful introductions of all of us who are speakers too. I'm Lori Hostuttler, and I am the interim director of the West Virginia and Regional History Center. We are the Archives and Special Collections part of WVU Libraries here in Morgantown. We're part of WVU, but we're open to the general public, and our goal is to preserve and provide access to materials that document the history and culture of West Virginia. And so the wonderful history of women and of men and organizations who have been working over the years to try to change and improve the lives of women. That's the story, that's the history and culture that we're trying to preserve through the West Virginia Feminist Activist Collection. And so we are doing that through the collection of records and documents, photographs, ephemera, some artifacts, posters, flyers, pins, and correspondence, journals, all kinds of really neat records and the kinds of materials that historians use to write history, writers use to be inspired, and these materials become part of an archive that are that really is a record of our past, and it's accessible to everybody. So I'm here to kind of talk about the beginnings of the formation of the West Virginia Feminist Activist Project. And I don't want to spend too much time on that because we're really focused on what's next and the experiences of the Artemis sisters. But just to touch a little bit on what we have been doing, as Judith noted, this project really got kicked off because of her and because of Christine Doherty, and we had some great meetings starting around 2017 to try to think about this project and how we could develop this research collection. And as Judith said, we would collect slowly. This work of collecting is slow work anyways. We all have it's difficult to to give up our materials, and it's something that we really want to be thoughtful about. But then, over time, we started we applied for some grants. We received 2 grants in 2021, one from the West Virginia Humanities Council, which I want to note is supporting this program that we're presenting tonight, and another from the WVU Humanities Center. And both of those grants have made the work of collecting records and doing oral history possible. And so, it's important. I think the goal of this is to create this archive, but also to really reinforce the point and to I guess, get the word out that women's history is important, women's records are important, and it's a gap in the archival record. There are a fewer number of collections that document the history of women and also people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color as well. And so we want to make sure that we can tell a fuller story of our history by collecting these materials. And like our first program was in 2021 was Don't Throw It Out, to really ask people to think about and to we really want to let people know, like, your history and your story has value, and women are often the first to discount that and to downplay and not really acknowledge that they've had a role in making change. And so we want to let everybody know that you do have that a role, you do play a part, and the things that you have done are important. We spent a lot of time at the beginning talking about what we were going to call it. Would it be feminist? What does activist mean? And those are still questions that we talk about. I do want to say that we've taken a very broad view of activism. You didn't have to just be marching out on the streets, which I think is what a lot of people turn to when they think of it. There's a lot of ways through advocacy, through art, through education, that people affect change. So, that really makes this an inclusive story. I did just want to, give a little bit of sort of statistics, or not really statistics, which is, I'm like the least number-oriented person that you could meet, but we have been active, and since we began, we've collected about 15 new collections, ranging from papers of legislators and peace activists, advocacy organizations, coal miners, and the Artemis sisters that we're going to hear from this evening. There's also been ongoing work in collecting oral history, and we're partnering with Jesse Wilkerson and the history department, who is doing the Women Miners Oral History Project, and all of those materials will be deposited at the History Center and be part of the Feminist Activist Collection. And then there's been other oral histories as well. Christine has been interviewed. The founders of the West Virginia Women Work organization have been interviewed. And I do want to highlight that this is all really important to acknowledge the contributions of our colleagues in the WVU History Department, Jen Thornton and Jesse Wilkerson. Without them and the support of their students, a lot of this work would be much harder to do. And so, in addition to collecting records and oral histories, we also, through the West Virginia Humanities Council grant, have put on, this will be our 4th program, this is Lost and Found, but we have done 3 programs prior to this. The first was called West Virginia History Makers, Black Women's Activism in the Archive. The second was Engaging the Queer Feminist Archive. The third was Women, Work, and Activism in the Coal Mine, Stories from the Women Miners Oral History Project. and now lost and found. The first two that I mentioned are available now on our website, and I'll put that link in the chat. We're still waiting on the captioning for the women minors. Let me see if that, oh, well, I'm working on that. We're still waiting on captioning for the women minors program. And so we should have that soon. I thought that it was going to be up for this meeting, but it isn't. But that was a fabulous program from back in November. I hope that that will be up soon. And then this program will also be added and available for people to watch in the future too. So it's been a busy couple years, and even though I can say that, you know, we started this in 2017, it still feels like we're very much at the beginning of this project. And at the end of the event, I'll focus a little bit more on the future in some closing remarks. So I want to turn it over to the next person on the program.
So do we think, is that Carrie then now?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to welcome everybody, and I'm glad to see we have really a good turnout for this Zoom call. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Artemis and how we got started and some of the cultural things that we did. And then Betty will talk more about some of the social action and political work that was done by Artemis. So as Judith had mentioned, in the early 1980s, I was asked to be on a steering committee for a Women in Health conference that Judith was the co-chair. And after the program was set in early 82, I went to the committee and said that I thought that it would be great if we brought Holly Near to town to be like the closing night concert. And well, I was really excited. I think aside from maybe Judith, one other person, I don't think any of the other women on the committee knew who Holly Near was, but they said, sure, go out and get her. So, you know, so I did. And I contacted Redwood Records and found out that Holly Near was in fact available. And before long, I received a contract and a very long rider. And when I got it, I realized that I myself could not organize this concert by myself. And I couldn't run it through the WVU conference office, which I was manager of, but it was a full-time job and I knew I couldn't do it. So I reached out to Betty. She and I knew each other because we were board members for the Women's Information Center, and asked if she could help pull together some women that can help me organize this concert. And I had a lot riding on the concert because I worked at the university. We were using the facilities at the university. I was doing it on behalf of the university. So we had to make sure it was like perfect and that there were no mess ups. And so I felt a lot of responsibility to the university, and especially to Judith and to the steering committee members who allowed me to bring this performance to Morgantown. So Betty and got together some folks and we rounded up some other women. And I think by the time we got it together, we maybe had like 12 women who were all ready to work on this Holly Near concert. And we worked on it for about 4 months. The concert was in the fall of 82. And we had a lot to do, and we had to do outreach. We had to do publicity. We had to figure out ticket sales. We had to figure out how to get Holly and her band to Morgantown and where to house them, which ended up being my apartment. But but there was just a lot to do, and I had to deal a lot with the university system in terms of like working at the Creative Arts Center and dealing with the infrastructure that was going to be required to do the concert. So we all, met like every week for all those months, and we, would come into those meetings. We'd have like little agendas. We'd have like a list of what we had to get done, and everybody took on their assignments, and the next week came back and everybody had everything done, which was great. And the concert was a huge success. We had women not only who came from around the country for the Women in Health conference, but we actually were able to bring in a lot of women from the Pittsburgh area and from the Eastern Panhandle and from Southern West Virginia. And so we did we did that, and we, all gave ourselves great pats on the back that we succeeded, but we also recognized how much fun it was for us to do that. So then we thought, well, what the heck? Let's do something else. And why can't we bring in another group? Why can't we bring in Sweet Honey in the Rock and that kind of thing? So before long, we started doing almost like monthly coffee houses, and we arranged for women in the community who were, singers, songwriters, performers, artists, comedians, whomever that needed the platform and needed the exposure. We gave them that exposure, and at the same time, we were able to kind of put some money in our kitty so that we could actually start bringing performers to Morgantown. So we had some money to kind of to have. And we did that for a very long time, and it was very successful, and they were always very popular. And then we also realized that, well, gee, like WVU has a WVU radio station, and well, we should demand that we have an hour at least of women's music. So we went and petitioned, and sure enough, they bowed down and said, yeah, you're right. So every Sunday afternoon, we had a 1 hour of women's music or interviews, whichever we chose to do. Michelle was the DJ. And myself and myself and the rest of us on Artemis took turns as producers each week to kind of put together the music, and then to be in the studio with Michelle to get everything going. And then we continued to bring in people into Morgantown. We brought Robin Flower, who was a really great bluegrass band out of the Bay Area. We did, in fact, bring Sweet Honey in the Rock to Morgantown, like in the fall of '83. And then I was co-chair of a Women in Creativity Conference in '83, '84. And my big thing was to bring Alive, which was a women's jazz group out of like the Bay Area, to be our closing event for that particular conference. And so we did all this, and we had like really a lot of great fun, but we also, I think, did things that were outside the box. I mean, I think two examples were with the Holly Near concert. Holly was one of the few artists at the time who brought a sign language interpreter as part of her band. And while we were really excited to have Susan Freundlich there, we all recognized that, well, what if like she's out there and there isn't anybody that is, is needing like her interpretation. And so a couple of us got together and realized that there was like the Romney School for the Deaf over in the Eastern Panhandle. And we contacted them and asked if we could bring a busload of their students to the concert so that they could benefit from Susan Freundlich doing the sign language interpretation. They were very excited about it. So we wrote a couple of grants and got money from some local churches to get the bus. We got McDonald's to provide food for them. Many of their parents showed up. And so that evening when Susan Freundlich walked out for the concert, in front of her were like, 3 or 4 rows of students and their parents who were there, who possibly for the first time were actually able to participate in a concert with a sign language interpreter there for them. And that was like in '82. So that was like really something that wasn't really done at that time. So then when Sweet Honey in the Rock came, we realized that like we would get a great turnout, but it would be all university, attendees. And that while there was like a few small African-American communities outside Morgantown in the coal mining towns, we knew that there was no way that we would be able to get them into Morgantown. So we thought, well, why don't we write a grant and see if like Sweet Honey would be willing to stay over Saturday night and do a free concert in one of those communities on Sunday morning. And they were very excited about it. So again, we wrote some grants and got some money, and we worked with the social worker at the Scotts Run Settlement House out in this little rural community. We gave her a bunch of the Sweet Honey tapes. She went and did listening parties in the community and gave out free tickets to this great concert that was going to happen. And the morning of, there were only a few of us, myself and I think maybe 3 others, drove Sweet Honey out. They were set up in the little gym at the Scott Run Settlement House, I think there were maybe like 200 little folding chairs, a very old sound system. And we weren't sure what to expect. I think they were nervous and we were nervous. And we didn't know when the doors opened if anybody would come because there were free tickets. And in fact, we opened the doors and all of a sudden these families came in all in their Sunday best. because they had all just come from church. And they all filed in. The place was packed. And then Sweet Honey took the stage in these beautiful African robes and headdress. And they sang for 2 hours straight. They sang the songs that came out of Africa, and they sang the songs that were sung on the slave ships. And they sang the songs that were sung in the fields. And they sang the songs that were sung in the churches. And so for 2 hours, they just sang straight. And when they were done and we were getting them to the airport, they were just like over the moon. I mean, they just said it was like one of the best things that they had ever done. And they were very grateful that we kind of went that extra mile to make sure that this community got to hear them. So those were things that we did that I think, we just said, why not? We would just come up with ideas and go, well, why can't we do it? Nobody said we couldn't. So we would just kind of do that. And we did it through those 3 years or so that we worked together. We were just this really great group of women who we all respected each other. We all listened to each other, and we all valued what each of us brought to Artemis. And we worked, in just a consensus fashion. Like, we never really had a leader. When we had our weekly meetings, at the end of the meeting, somebody would volunteer who wanted to run the meeting like the next week. And, they would come in with their own agenda items, and we'd come in with our little assignments. And we all did our jobs that we were supposed to. We never had anyone that we thought, oh gosh, we really better check on so-and-so because they might drop the ball. That never, ever happened. And we were like a really eclectic group. I mean, we were like, some of us worked at the university. Some of us were students at the university. Others came from like legal aid, and others worked out in the community. And we were like, straight, and we were gay. We came from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but we all gelled and we had fun. I mean, even when we had really stressful times, what are we going to do about this? Or we never worried. We just had fun. And I think that was like our big thing. We had a lot of laughs, and that's all I got to say. No. And so that's, for me, like, that was the music part of it. And I think Betty could talk more about some of the more serious work that we did out there in the community.
Well, I'm Betty Justice, one of the original members of Artemis, along with several other of the women that are here for this seminar. We started out thinking of ourselves as women's cultural producers. But that's what we called ourselves, was a collective focused on music and art. But we were so successful at the Holly Near concert at organizing it and bringing so many people in from around the state and Pittsburgh and so forth, that in the fall of 1982, just after this Holly Near concert, I was having supper with my friends Al and Millie Carlin, and Al said, Betty and Millie, you need to organize a public education campaign. I've got this woman who is charged with first-degree murder, and if I don't have the community more informed about domestic violence, she's going to get convicted of murder. The woman's name was Lorraine Moman, and she was the mother of 3 young children. And she had shot her husband, who was trying to break in through a locked door, and she killed him. So she was charged with first-degree murder, and she did have bail, so she wasn't in jail waiting for her trial. But Al was particularly concerned because there had just been a trial a few months before in which a woman had shot and killed a man in a truck when he tried to rape her. And that had resulted in a hung jury, but he knew that most of the jurors in that case had actually wanted to convict her. But at least one juror held out. So she had a hung jury, but the prosecutor had already announced that he was going to try her again on her murder charge. So at Al's request, he asked me and his wife to start getting a group together. And of course, I was a member of Artemis, and I thought, well, there's this core group of women, and even though we didn't really organize a collective to engage in political and social activity, I'll see if they want to be the core, because I knew that this could only be done with a core group of 10 or 15 women or men. So the Artemis sisters readily agreed, and we had from late October until about the middle of February to get this done. And so we had Artemis, which is continuing its work at that time, doing coffee houses and the other events that Carrie talked about. But we had a larger group of 25 to 30 people that were called the Lorraine Moment Defense Committee. And we decided that we would produce material that was not academic or clinical or so forth, and that we would speak to the larger community of Monongalia County, because that's where the jurors would be coming from. They would be people from, the far end of Western Monongalia County is, quite a long distance from Morgantown. But jurors from out there would possibly be would be deciding Lorraine's future. So we did enormous amounts of publicity. We had a leaflet called "A Victim, Not a Murderer." We leafleted at numerous places, grocery stores and so forth, all over the county. We called every civic, social, or church group that we thought might listen to us to ask for an invitation to come speak to them. And I don't think I'm not sure, but I don't think we had anyone turn us down. We even sent off this woman whom I had not known before. She was a law student. She was kind of the meekest personality that you can imagine. She was very sweet, but she was very smart too. We sent her to talk to the VFW, and they responded to what she shared with them. At the same time, we were having fundraising events, several fundraising events, because we needed to bring in an expert witness. And we raised quite a bit of money. We had the woman who was then kind of the preeminent person in the country who could speak to why women stay in abusive relationships. Why hadn't Lorraine Moman left? Her husband, who had brutally beaten her over many years, and they had been in the legal system for a long time as well. So the question of why did she stay was the answer that that question had to be answered in a way that ordinary people could understand why she was still married to him, living with him. So we were, I believe Carrie was the person that actually did the work to get the expert witness. So during these, approximately 3.5 months, we were on television, we were on radio, we were in newspapers, we were on the streets. And by the time the trial came around, there was probably hardly anybody in Monongalia County that had not heard the name Lorraine Moman. And so the trial was in February. It lasted about a week. Many of us were there every day to provide support to Lorraine. We also arranged for someone to help care for her children during this period. We also arranged for someone to cook dinner for them and bring it to them every night at their home. So the trial went on. We had our expert witness. Everything, all the evidence was really solid. But there was this question of a woman shooting a man in what we called a self-defense situation, and what the prosecutor called the murder. And so the jury went out with its instructions, and we assumed that it would be days before there was a decision, because we knew that the previous trial of the other woman had resulted in a hung jury, which meant after days and days of deliberation, they had not been able to reach a unanimous decision. So we were prepared that it would be possibly 4 or 5 days before we got a decision. And we were still in the courtroom. We had not left, thankfully. We were in the courtroom in the hallways, talking to each other about the trial, talking to Al and to Lorraine and so forth. And in 26 minutes, the jury advised the judge that had a decision. And it really scared us to death, because we thought it would be for conviction, that they had all agreed that she was behind a locked door, and shooting him was not real self-defense. But amazingly, in those 26 minutes, they had all decided that she had the right to self-defense, and they acquitted her. We then went on to help the lawyer that was doing Elizabeth Strickland's retrial in much the same way, but not quite as intense as we had done for Lorraine. But I think it was in June of '83, Elizabeth got acquitted as well of having killed a man that she had hitchhiked a ride with, who tried to rape her in his truck. And she had a gun in her purse, and she pulled it out and she shot him, and he died. And he was, he came from a family that was more well known in the Morgantown area. So we were certainly anxious about the outcome of that one, because she was not nearly as sympathetic a victim as Lorraine had been, because she had hitchhiked the ride at 1 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, with a stranger. But we kind of segued from the Moman Committee to the Elizabeth Strickland Committee to the Stop Abuse of Women Committee. In addition to our many cultural activities, we started in on issues like pornography. We had the first Take Back the Night march in Morgantown. The students at the law school had organized their spring get-together, which was not an official university event, but it was a common annual event for law students. And they had named it Pimps and Prostitutes. So I think 3 of us went immediately to the president's office. I think Michelle and I were definitely there. And I'm not sure who else. And we made it widely known that we would be at the premises on that Saturday night with several cameras. And anybody who attended that party could expect that they would have their picture taken, and it would be publicized that they were engaging in this vicious, racist, and sexist behavior. The party fizzled. So we just had a number of activities, mostly involving abuse of women, and continued on with our cultural activities. And I think Eileen is going to talk about our at the time, we did not document any of this. We didn't take many pictures. We, didn't conscientiously save documents, posters, flyers. Eileen was one of the people that saved a lot of material. And she's going to tell us about why she saved it.
Well, before we go there, I think the segue is to me. This is Michelle.
Oh, sorry.
So it's okay, sweetheart. So what I've been asked to talk a little bit about, and I'm conscious of our time as well, but Betty and Carrie have laid out a great pieces of kind of the things that we had done. I'm going to just list off a few more of those. Before I do that, I was asked to talk about what would have been lost and how we organized the Artemis collection. And obviously what would have been lost is, as Betty was referencing, some of us actually saved some things. I wasn't so good about that, but some other members of us, of Artemis, they're going to talk about how they and why they saved. But that was the exciting part. What would have been lost basically are our stories. We have had reunions and we've talked among ourselves, and we've, I think, tried to talk to friends and family if they'll listen about some of what we did back in the 80s. But to actually have that lodged in an archive is very powerful for the, what I would call this next generation coming up, as Judith referenced, in some very hard times, to be able to look back to that another period of pretty hard times in the early 80s, what was going on politically, and kind of how we pushed and forged and leaned into the culture to bring forward what our ideals were, and had a lot of fun doing it as well. But we started pulling together when we were first approached, by Judith, which was wonderful, about Artemis as a potential participant in the archive. We started the way women start, which is, let's get together and talk about what are our stories. And we asked folks in a Zoom call to talk to 4 questions. The 4 questions were: what was happening in your life at the time that led you to join the Artemis Sisters Collective? Secondly, which of the Artemis activities did you participate in? Thirdly, how did participating in those activities affect your life at that time, but then also going forward with your life? And then fourth, what artifacts might you have that you might be willing to donate to a collective? And as we always worked in a collaborative way, we sort of said, okay, now let's keep talking with each other. We had a couple of more follow-up conversations. And yes, Eileen was great. She had moved some things from West Virginia to Massachusetts with her. She's going to talk about that. Cindy wonderfully also had a bunch of stuff to donate. I want to shout out to Mary and Robin, who had some photographs. Annette also had photos. I had some photos. Carrie had saved some of the recordings from the there's something about the women radio show, so we had some of those. And Diana had as well. So she was able to sort of Diana, after I moved away, continued with the something about the women radio show. So we had those as well. A couple other things that people donated were t-shirts. We actually had 4 different t-shirts, and people had collected and saved those. One was called "I Ain't Kissing No More Frogs," and we made these up. Andy Faulkner did a bunch of the drawings for those for us. Some of you remember Andy. "Sisterhood is Blooming, Spring Will Never Be the Same" was another one. I want to mention that Betty ran a campaign to be elected to the state House of Representatives, which we all worked on that campaign. We did phone calls, we did door-to-door knocking on doors. Carrie was her campaign manager at the same time when she was trying to pull off the Women in Creativity conference that we all were working on too. And the fourth one was Eileen donated the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence for a Safer State and Family t-shirt. So we all had these t-shirts that we would wear to different events. People also saved planning documents. I want to mention that Carrie has donated a bunch of stuff directly to the archive, and she, as well as Eileen, are going to talk in a minute about saving and donating those things. In addition to the concerts that were mentioned, I left in '84. Carrie left not shortly thereafter, but there were Artemis folks like Mary and Robin and Peggy and Diana and Evelyn, and so many. There were numbers of folks who continued beyond our leaving, and they brought Sweet Honey in the Rock back to Morgantown for a second time. They also brought Hazel Dickens. So the concerts went on, as well as coffee houses where Liz Lowe, I'm going to shout to you, you know, a comedian stood up and told great stories and shared her incredible comic sensibilities, you know, with women in Morgantown. And we like to think we created a stage for her, and also some other local emerging artists, which was, so we always blended this cultural work with our political work. I also wanted to mention Sister Space was not mentioned. So we were trying to find places to meet. We were meeting in each other's homes. And then someone had the idea, I'm not really sure who that was, and said, gosh, why don't we have a lending library? Well, like Carrie had all these books. And so, and we needed a meeting space, a place where women could come and feel comfortable to talk about all kinds of issues. At that time, the Linda Conway lawsuit was coming up. I actually went to the Supreme Court, and it was an issue where a woman was pushed out of her employment based purely on the way she dressed. And it was out of that evolved, something called the Committee for Individual Rights, where we were really taking on issues around gender identity at that time in the early 80s in Morgantown. I really think it's kind of nice today. I've got two daughters who identify as non-gender specific. And so to know that, oh my gosh, you know, we were planting some seeds at a time that, although politics certainly have shifted in this state and country, it's still you can't take that away. You can't you know, now that we've lodged this, you know, it's a her story that is like a foundation. It's just a foundation for women today to look back at that. I also mentioned the People for Justice campaign, working on Betty's campaign, but also Mary and Robin and other folks did other political work, like the work around El Salvador at a time in a small rural community, to be working on human rights issues based in another country, and being able to speak to that and educate people. I mean, I find that very profound. So so I just wanted to sort of say, look at these things. And really 82 to 84, I was there till 86. I know a number of these things were going on, probably up until I think 88, that as folks were kind of making some moves out of Morgantown and into other places. But it was I'm going to say remarkable. Then I want to mention that we began collecting these things. Celia came on to work with us. She's going to speak in a little while. So great to have a staff person to kind of help us as we were organizing this together. And then we pull all this stuff together, submitted it to the Feminist Archive. And I just want to shout out again to Lori and Judith for really having our backs as we've thought through how to do this in a way that would have value going forward. So then I want to pass on to Eileen first, and then Carrie to talk about what contributions they made to the archive and why they each decided to save and share the Artemis materials.
So
Do you
hi,
want-
everybody. Oh, are you going first, Carrie, or am I?
Go, Eileen, you're next.
Okay. So I'm Eileen, and first of all, it's so wonderful to hear this her story all over again and to get everybody's perspectives. I actually thought I was quite good at remembering detail, but there were so many things that I didn't remember. I was probably there at the beginning of Artemis, and it's funny because when I was thinking about this earlier, I thought that Lorraine Moment had come first. And I thought that that's how I met Betty, was through the Lorraine Moment Defense Committee. I was actually a member of the National Lawyers Guild at the time, and I worked on the Lorraine Moment legal defense team. I was a baby lawyer, and it was an all-male, fantastic team of people who were representing Lorraine, and they invited me as the baby lawyer, and if I'm stomping on feet, sorry, but I think I was the only female member of the team. It's a bad idea to have a brand new lawyer be part of a legal defense team, but they didn't make me do anything. They just had me along. I got to go to all the meetings indoor with the judge, who I think was Judge Starcher at the time. Was that the judge? And I got to be involved in all the legal defense work and got to talk to Lorraine. But what struck me more than the legal defense team, which was fantastic, was what Betty was talking about. How there was this other part of the team that was involved so holistically in the life of Lorraine Moment. It was like incredible. Who would have thought to make sure that kids are going to be picked up from school? And I wasn't involved in that part, but I learned so much by just watching everybody get involved and do different things. And what had occurred to me was that all the work we did, whether it was Lorraine Moment, whether it was producing music through Artemis Sisters, whether it was through having a safe space at Sister Space, the women's radio show, all the things that we did, it really mirrored a philosophy that in order for us to be effective, there had to be components of the work that included community organizing and education. And that's, I think, what everybody was kind of talking about. And it was just fantastic. And so, everybody's kind of talked about, like, we didn't really know what we were doing. We just kind of all were willing to learn. We were passionate about issues. And as everybody said, it was just exciting and fun and new. And, it just was something that impacted so many people. So when I heard that West Virginia University was creating a WVU Feminist Archive, and that Artemis was going to be included, I was so excited. I know there was so many people who were really excited, and I was excited too. And I was excited because not only did I think, oh my God, finally Artemis Sisters is being recognized, finally, but I got to take a trip down memory lane that made me remember all of the powerful things that we had done. And I'm supposed to talk about like what contributions were made and why I kept things. So when I got the email from Michelle, I think it was in June of 2021, requesting information about Artemis, I started happily poking around my house. And for those of you who know me and have been here, I have a pretty big house. And I was actually astonished about all the things that I had collected and saved over the years. I think that I am like the classic pack rat. I found over 2 big, huge boxes jam-packed with papers and things, which was actually quite amazing given the number of times I had moved, including from West Virginia to Massachusetts, and the number of times I had purged over the years. I am a pack rat, but I purged. And, you know, in thinking about it, some of my friends and family might say, well, I was just the biggest pack rat in the world, and that's why I have stuff. But in thinking about it more, I think that it was more than that. And I think it's that from the time that I left West Virginia in 1988, I was very aware of how special and significant the work that we did was. And it was something that I think we've talked about this in our reunion. It was an era where we never were able to ever duplicate that kind of energy again. I think that we've done lots of different things, but we never were able to generate that kind of fantastic energy again. And in the back of my mind, I must have realized that the powerful advocacy we had done and the impact it had on so many different people somehow or rather needed to be saved. I don't know why I thought that, but that's what I thought. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I kept and thankfully now have contributed to its right places. So it comes in like a few different areas. There were the t-shirts that Michelle was talking about. I had 3 out of the 4 t-shirts in my closet. And as I said, I purge clothes, and the t-shirts were in this bag. And every single time I purge clothes, which is what, like 2 or 3 times a year, I'd open up this bag, I'd pull out the t-shirts, I'd smile and laugh or do whatever. And I'd say, nope, can't give these away. And I'd put them back in the bag again, and I'd put it away. And I don't know why I did that, but I did. And then I discovered that in pack rat fashion, I had calendars that went back to at least 1983, when 82 or 83 when we started. And it not only was served as a wonderful diary, but it recorded all these events and planning and to-do lists, and it just had all this stuff in it. And I started looking through them, and as I looked through them, I was like, how did I ever work? Because there was something always going on. And you know, I pulled out just an example, and since International Women's Day was yesterday, I picked out an example of what was in my calendar for March and April, and I'm just going to read it because I'm not going to remember that. So March 1st, Michelle, you were either on a TV or a radio show, WVOY. March 4th was the Lending Library. March 9th was a potluck at the Underground Railroad for International Women's Day. March 11th was an Artemis Sisters Coffee House. March 28th was another Lending Library, as well as April the 8th. April 14th, Carla was playing at Wild Sister. April 29th, 3 things happened. I worked at the Lending Library, there was a radio show, and there was a benefit, and what I wrote was Betty Maxwell's. I don't know what that means, but Betty must have been doing something at Maxwell's. So that was just like 2 months out of, you know, years worth of archives. And it was just so much fun to go through it. I actually didn't get through all of it, and I'm still going to try, but that was that. The other thing was that, you know, as a lawyer, I not only worked on the Lorraine Momen Legal Defense Committee. I guess as a baby lawyer, I thought I could do lots of things. And I was incorporating Sister Space. So I had in a pile of my clients, which I guess Sister Space was my client, in the pile of my clients, I had information about the the incorporation, what's the philosophy. I had all these minutes of meetings because you have to keep them in order to incorporate as a 501(c) rather status. So I had all these things in a file, things I had totally forgotten about. And then the last part was I had boxes upon boxes upon boxes. And unlike the t-shirts, which I really remember, every single time I went and looked at the t-shirts, I don't really remember looking at the boxes. But nevertheless, I had boxes with press releases and flyers and pictures and to-do lists. And, there was just so many things in the boxes, which now are in the archives. And then knowing myself the way I do and how I operate, I think that when I was on a purging spree, I would open up the box and it had Artemis and Sister Space materials in it. And I'd say, I don't think I want to look at this right now. I don't want to get rid of this right now. And I just put it back in the box and put it back in the closet. So maybe I was a pack rat, but I was also a lawyer, and because of being a lawyer, I think I'm charged with saving things and providing proof of events, because we all know how people can reinvent history these days. So I think that's what I did. And last night I came up with something. I hate the word pack rat. So I decided that even though in my mind I'm a pack rat, I renamed it to a pack rat for a reason. That's why I kept stuff. So I'm very happy that all of the things that I kept are now in a brand new home where they should be, and I didn't throw them out. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you. What was the new name you called it, Eileen? Because you were going in and out.
Oh, it was a pack rat for a pack rat. What did I say? Pack rat for a purpose.
Reason.
Why don't you say it again?
No, pack rat for a reason. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's my turn.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have two things relative to the hidden and the found and the shared, and one is related to Artemis, and one is like on a personal side. So I was never, someone who really saved a lot of stuff, but when I left Morgantown for California in January of '85, I took with me just a little packet of newspaper clippings and materials from the Women in Creativity Conference that I had been the co-chair of, and like the program and the source book and those kinds of things, and articles that were written and thank you letters that I received for doing the conference, etc. And I had those and some other things that had happened while I was at WVU that I took with me, and just kind of, I moved to California and I just kind of had them in a folder and put them in a file cabinet. And I moved several times when I was in the Bay Area and then moving to LA. And that little folder always just came with me, but I never really looked at it. Or I had a paper that I submitted in 1978 for Judith's class that was called Growing Up Motherless. And I still had the copy, and I still had Judith's little notes on there. I think she gave me an A for it. But, I just had all this stuff together, and I just never really knew what to do with it. I just kind of kept it. And then the folks from WVU came along and wanted it for a collection that they were doing for the Feminist Activist Collection. And, they asked for my stuff. So I sent it to them. And it's the first time I'd actually really had taken it out and looked at it again and go, oh, gosh, I forgot about this stuff. And gosh, I forgot about that paper I'd written for Judith and whatever. And so I sent that on and when they asked for it, a few years ago. But in the meantime, when I was in the Bay Area, like in the mid 90s, out of the blue, I got a package from an aunt of mine back in New Jersey, my Aunt Hannah. And, and she never sent me anything, so I was surprised when I opened it. And she had this little note saying, I thought it was time that you had this, information. And when I opened it, it was like stuff about my family. My father died when I was really young. He died in 1958. And apparently when he died, she kind of took ownership of some of his materials. And so here it was like in the 90s, like, 40 years later, that she wanted to turn them over to me. Again, like, she had them and she wanted to share them with me. And it was like my father's discharge papers from like World War I. It was his retirement papers from DuPont. It was, his death certificate. It was my mother's death certificate. It was my class pictures, like grade school pictures of my brothers that I had never seen before. And so I had them, and again, I stuffed them in the envelope and, kind of forgot about it until when I was back in New Jersey after I retired, and I, was getting a lot of questions from one of my nieces, Courtney, about my family. And my brother never really shared a whole lot. So she would always ask me questions about, my father and my mother and where they came from, and about my brothers who all died that she never got to meet. Like, 3 of my brothers, she had never met him because he had died, early. And so she would always ask me these questions. And when I was getting this stuff ready for the collection, I, thought about, I should like give these to Courtney. I need to like share these in the same way I'm sharing these documents that I had done at WVU. I need to share it, this stuff with my niece. And so, so a couple of months ago, I did a binder, and she would always ask me questions about me and what I did and why I did it and how I ended up in California and what I did in California and that kind of thing. So before about 3 months ago, I did or 6 months ago, I did a binder for her that included all those documents that I had, like all the stuff of my father and pictures of my mother and pictures of my mother and father and all of my brothers when we were all like really young. And she never knew. And I had their little obituary so she would know who they were, and stuff about her father that she didn't know, and pictures she had not seen of her father before, and of me as well. So it was like I had this whole binder for her that was just about our family. And then I did another binder that was of me because she kept asking me so many times. So I kept all the copies that I had sent on to the collection. I made copies for myself, including that paper I done about growing up motherless. And I put those in a binder and gave those to Courtney as well. And, I would always ask her, well, why do you want all this stuff? And she'd always say, well, because when Cammie, who's her little 8-year-old daughter, she goes, well, when Cammie, gets older, I want her to know who, her grandparents were. And I want her to know who Aunt Carrie, was and what you did. And so I gave this binder to her of all my collection of everything I'd done in Morgantown that I had, and everything I'd done, like when I was in California that I had records of and stuff. And when I gave both those binders to her, she just started crying. And it really touched me that that was really important to her. And it made me really glad that I had them, and made me really happy that I took the time to put them in binders and give them to her, because she didn't know her grandparents. She didn't know her uncles. And I was just trying to fill in that picture for her of our family and of me. So she would quit asking me questions about what I did. So she had my whole history. So I think like the whole collection, like both for Artemis, and then it just really kind of hit me at home of like, needing the same thing of I need to like, I have this and I need to like share it so that it's my history and my family's history is carried on to the next generation. So that's what I did.
We can't hear you, Judith.
You can't hear me? Okay, yeah. So Lori, I know we're going over what you might have expected, but I really want Celia to be able to talk to us a little bit. Can we go on?
Yeah, I think so. Let's have Celia. I mean, I think we've got another 15 minutes in us, Celia.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Celia.
All right. Thank you so much. I just want to say it's been a real honor and delight to be able to work on this project, and to continue to be able to work on this project. Now I know this panel is a follow-up to Don't Throw It Out, and the connotation of that is the stuff. And as you've talked about, you've given so generously of your like physical physical things, t-shirts and records and photographs. It's just amazing. And my part in this has mostly been to collect the stories. And instead of, even though I've gotten a chance to interact with some of the things, and as you know, those of you who I've done interviews with, I've gotten a chance to ask you questions based on some of those things that you shared. But my part has really been to try to help give you a chance to tell your stories the way that you want to and the way that you think is important. And so I think there's a few different reasons that I think that particular aspect of this is really important. And I think a lot of you who've spoken before have mentioned different aspects of it, but I'd just like to articulate them together. And Michelle talked about wanting to preserve some of these records for the next generation. And I'm a member of that next generation. And so is Claire. And we're here and we're getting to hear these stories. And both of us we're getting to hear them both in two different ways. We're getting to hear them as people who are involved in research into feminist work. And so we're getting to hear stories about generations of feminists and generations of this organizational work that's been done. And learning about that and learning about the history of that, that's something that's really important to us. And also, there's another part. So there's the research part, and then there's also, as feminists ourselves and people who are interested in the same issues, in a lot of cases, the exact same issues that you all were working toward. These are really powerful records for those as well. So new generations, not only of historical researchers and people who are interested in the history of feminist activity and the history of women's work and women's organization and women's communication, also as activists ourselves and as people who are working out how we fit into the world and engage with some of these issues, having the stories, the records of the things that you were able to do is really inspiring and teaches us things about communication, the ways that you were able to bridge gaps of race, socioeconomic status, sexuality, all of those things, of course, gender. And the other, so there's the idea that is so generous of sharing what you've done with the new generation. And we can be really incredibly grateful for that. And the other part of it is just the fact of, as Eileen said, of bringing you all together again and letting you share your stories, not only with us, but with each other. And the fact that in telling those stories, you have a chance to reconnect with old friends. Some of you never disconnected with old friends, but some of you have mentioned that you've gotten through this project, you've gotten a chance to re-meet people and get to know people again who you might have lost touch with before, and also to share your memories that maybe one person remembers some detail and one person remembers another detail. But so many people, I'm just looking at the participants on this Zoom call, and so many people here, I know from having talked to you, are members of Artemis and have continued that work into the rest of your lives. And so to be able to help facilitate a rejoining of this group of really incredible women is such an honor. And I'm excited to see this project continue. I think Lori's probably got some more concise ways of ideas about how the project is going to continue. And I've talked to a number of you about that as well. But I just want to say those are some of my thoughts about why I've been doing what I've been doing, why I see that as important. And I just want to say thank you for allowing me to do that.
Thank you, Celia.
Thank you. Thank you. Huh. Lori, did you want to continue the lead that Celia just gave you?
Yes, I do. First of all, I want to acknowledge Celia and just say how thankful I am, we all are, for for her work. She truly, I think she's inspiring to me, and I think to the Artemis sisters as well. And I'm really looking forward to her continuing to work with the Artemis materials. I also want to also give a shout out to Claire Tryon, who's in the Zoom tonight, who is also a graduate assistant that's working on the Feminist Activist Collection and that has been doing oral histories on the project. And I wanted to also, we've had a number of students from the WVU history department, including V. Kanopka and Emily Walter and others who have been a part of this. And, I think Celia made a wonderful point about, these records are there to create an archive, but they are inspiring to a younger generation that is facing similar problems. And the spirit of connection and collaboration and activism is just so strong in these records. And the stories that give the context to the records. I mean, often in archives, we're faced with a document and it tells us a lot, but to have the voice of the person that created that document alongside it is a treasure. So that oral history work is so important to this project. And so, I wanted to, sort of conclude and with a little bit about the future. I mean, we wanted to have time.
Can I interrupt, Lauren, for just a sec? Before you do we have a couple of minutes for any other that Artemis folks who might be joining us, or do we have a couple of minutes if people had questions before you do the final wrap up? Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I was actually going to just sort of say my piece and then let it go so that then people could, since we are 15 minutes over, to let folks, if they want to drop out. And but just I have and then I have 2 sentences. One's just about the continuing project is that this has been supported by the administration of WVU Libraries and has been an important project for the West Virginian Regional History Center. So it will continue on. We'll continue collecting records. We'll continue doing oral histories. We'll continue applying for grants with the support of Carol Wilkinson, Deb Miller, Paula Martinelli, Judith, Christine, Susan Kelly, and others that are on our steering committee. And we see a bright future. A big announcement that I want to make is that we're going to be debuting an exhibit that will feature different parts of the Feminist Activist Collection on October 16th this year. And so keep your eye out for that. Artemis is going to be one of the big parts of that exhibition. And then we're working on ways that these collections come in, they have to be processed by our archivists. And we're developing a new system that manages our digital content so that we can get some of these, not all, but some of these materials online. So stay tuned for all of that. I think what's next for the West Virginia Feminist Activist Collection is a lot of good work that's going to document a lot of fantastic people and all of their efforts to improve the world that we live in. So I'll stop talking from there. And then we do want to hear from other Artemis members that are in the group that might want to share about the things that they donated or what Artemis meant for them, or if people have questions. I would just ask for folks to, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hands, however you guys want to do this. Thank you.
So can we
Can I
take some
jump in real quickly? Can I jump in real quickly, Judith?
Oh, anybody? Yes, please.
Thanks. I just really wanted to say thank you for those stories. I didn't even have to close my eyes, and I was there. I could envision them. I could think of those places, that music, and that, we worked together, we played together, we danced together, we fought together. And I have an item that I can't figure out how to get, but if anyone remembers this on the wall from the lending library, it is the most amazing, thinnest piece of play ever. And it says Sister Space, a Feminist Collective. And so if I can figure out how to get it without breaking it, I might have to drive it. It just was a wonderful space for me. And on that note, I can't wait to teach my class tomorrow to my MSW students on organizing and advocating for change, because they're again going to hear about the Lorraine Moman Defense Fund and all the ways that you can organize with passion. I love the idea of passion organizing. You all inspired me and helped me do my work. So this was great. Thank you.
Any others? People who want to speak? Oh, please. Yes. Hi.
Hi, it's so good to see you with
Diana.
other faces again after so long. You look the same. I was going to say several things, but the only one that isn't obvious is that I wrote my thesis about my little news show as a how-to. So hopefully some young woman will find it and produce another one.
Say that again. What did you write?
I did a little news and interview show that I played on something about the women. And I did my graduate thesis, my journalism thesis on how I produced it. So I was sort of thinking of a young woman and a future generation reading it and producing a radio show with that as a little handbook.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Christine, I see. And without Christine, did you want to say something?
The piece that hasn't quite got into this discussion is the work piece, the what you do to make a living piece, and what I have been involved in over the years is starting with women in non-traditional occupations, and it's the women who ended up working in the coal fields. All of that happened not because the work you did, but because people said, "Hey, wait a minute, we're going to do all this stuff. I got to make a living wage. Come on now, it's okay. We can, if we want to be coal miners, that's all right." So I've been involved in the organization of women in non-traditional jobs, forming an organization in that. But we are still opening doors. I mean, one of the last things that happened was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's principle: if you pay taxes and it makes a job, you're entitled to the job. What a concept! My goodness. So that's where we are now. We were saying we're taxpayer citizens. We're supporting the young people here in our communities to do this kind of work. Well, then we get to say, if we want to do it too. I mean, it's and then I did a lot of international traveling. I got down to I always forget its name, the southern part of South America. And it turned out that they had this wonderful training program. The women all went into the kitchen and the men went all into the wood shop. And the idea, I said, so why is that? I don't know. I guess that's just what they wanted to do. And I said, I'll tell you what, next year, open it up. Ask them if that's really what they want to do. Turned around 100%. And all just, it just, so much of what we are trying to do is to help. It's one thing to advocate for safety in your home, but at the same time, to recognize that women and men have the necessity and the capacity to make those kind of choices. and we got to support them. We pay taxes. How about that? If I pay a tax, I get to get it's my job, right? That was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she took us in a whole nother place. So that's kind of where I'm landing on a lot of this. Thank you for
Thank
including.
you, Chris. Well, we're not including you, Chris. This wouldn't have happened without you.
Well,
So that's different than inclusion. So
that's true too.
yes.
No, I just like to get out there and stir things up and say, well, let's try this. So that's what I've done.
And let's try this. And we tried this. And
Yeah.
with some
Wonderful.
wonderful.
Yeah.
I just wanted,
my son Adam is here making the computer work. I guess when
I see.
but
Thank
it's
you. Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
it's a family affair for all of us. Just think of what we have done over the years for our daughters. And I get all racked up about it. Okay. Well, and I say to myself, what else should we? What else should we? There's still more to do. And we have to keep talking about it. Okay.
Okay, we will. We will. Laura, can I just want to, Michelle, anything you want to say? I want to wrap up now, unless there's something you want to add.
I
Anybody?
thought Liz Lowe was trying to say something.
Oh,
well, thank you for being that observant. Can you hear me?
yes. Hi.
Okay, so I just want to let you know I've got some things to donate as well. I know a couple of you may know, but I've got a recording from a partial Artemis Sister coffee house.
Ooh.
And I've got a recording, I think, of Carla.
Oh.
And I've got original work that I did for the Artemis Sisters coffee houses, like humorous poetry. I've got all my notes where I was writing comedy for the coffee houses, things of that. I've got props that I used during the Artemis Sister coffee houses.
Whoa. Oh,
So if you would like those things as well, I have them.
absolutely, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, you're kind of demonstrating on screen what we're hoping will happen, giving an example before we close. I would like to just close by remembering something from those of you who were at the Don't Throw It Out, and you don't have to have been there, but some of you who know me well know that I love playing with things to do with language. And at that particular one, I had looked up definitions of archive to see what they were. And among the definitions was a word that I didn't know, and most people didn't know either, muniments. We said, well, what's muniments? What's a muniment? And it turned out that a muniment it's not a word used much anymore, but it's another definition for document or a record. And usually a record that's used to defend the title to something. So it was related to older words for defending or protecting. And that amused me because the word that came to my mind as I was thinking about this program, and I couldn't figure out where it came from, was the word cradle. And so again, I decided, well, I'll look that up in a dictionary and see what that's going to tell me that I didn't expect. And the word cradle is related to words for nourish and to protect. And I love thinking about those words to take away as synonyms for archives. We are nourishing, we are protecting, we are supporting. And another word was intimacy, that a cradle is related to intimacy. And I think some of what Celia was saying too, I mean, here, people are giving of their things and of our hearts and connecting with each other. So I'm going to get rid of all my muniments and take care of all my cradles. And this has been a cradle for all of us today. And I am deeply moved and deeply grateful. And I'm looking forward so much to our next times together. And Lori, thank you for making it possible. And Christine, without whom literally none of us would be here today. So thank you. We will see each other soon, I hope.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. This has been great.
Beautiful.
Wonderful.
We still don't want to get off.
Bye.
And neither do I.
Thank you all so
All
much.
right, well, I'm going to end the recording in the session. I do appreciate everyone's attendance. It's such an inspiring group of people to be with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.